The Karnoff Admiral stood in the shadows of the control room, his massive form nearly blending into the walls as his sharp golden eyes locked onto the human child, seated at the simulation console, fingers dancing with remarkable precision over unfamiliar controls. The Admiral had seen many things in his life, had witnessed countless battles, and felt the weight of entire fleets at his command. But this was different. This was something he had never encountered before. He watched as the child adjusted the settings on the Starship simulator, the virtual environment flickering to life around her, the stars lighting up the screen like distant fires in the void, and the child's small hands seemed to know exactly where to go with no hesitation. Despite the fact that this was a program used only by military officers to simulate the most dangerous and complex space battles, there was no reason why this human child should be handling it with such ease. His mind immediately shifted into analysis mode. The Admiral's many years of experience had taught him to scrutinize every detail of any situation he encountered, but what he saw before him made no sense at all. In the Xarnath military, children weren't trained for combat simulations at such a young age. In fact, they were considered too immature for such responsibility. But this human child was handling the simulation like someone who had been doing it for years. At first, the Admiral thought it was a fluke. Perhaps the child had accidentally activated the program, or maybe it was just some kind of entertainment. But as the minutes passed, he could see something much more alarming unfolding before him. The child's movements were precise. Every flick of the wrist, every adjustment of the controls was executed with purpose. There was no sign of hesitation, no sign of confusion, just a calm and steady flow of decisions. He leaned forward slightly, his many eyes narrowing. As the simulation began to take shape before him, the child's starship was navigating through a dense asteroid field, the space around it filled with jagged rocks and deadly debris. Yet the ship moved effortlessly between the obstacles, not a single collision, not a single wrong turn. And then the child's fingers twitched again. The ship's engines fired at full throttle, pushing the ship forward at incredible speeds. And just as quickly, the child slammed on the brakes, skimming dangerously close to a massive asteroid. But never once did the ship's hull make contact with the rock. The Admiral's mouth parted slightly in surprise. This was no random play. The child wasn't just reacting to the environment around her, she was anticipating it. She was thinking several steps ahead, calculating every possible outcome, as if she could see the future. And the Admiral felt a strange stir in his chest, as if something deep within him was telling him to pay even closer attention. The child's eyes were fixed on the screen, her brow furrowed with concentration, but there was no fear, no uncertainty in her expression, just a deep focus that the Admiral had only ever seen in veteran commanders preparing for battle. He had witnessed starships in real life perform maneuvers of similar precision, but never by anyone so young, never by anyone so small, so fragile. Yet this human child seemed to possess an innate understanding of the battlefield, something that should not have been possible for someone of her age. And as the simulation continued, the Admiral could feel a strange unease creeping up inside him. He had seen many species across the galaxy attempt to simulate combat tactics, but none had ever come close to matching the skill and accuracy that this human child was displaying. None had ever exhibited such raw natural talent for the art of war. The Admiral's eyes never left the child as she continued to manipulate the controls, her small hands moving with a fluidity that was beyond anything he could have expected from a human of her age. He had watched warships glide through space in his time, but never had he seen a pilot handle a starship with such calculated ease, like she was born to command. At first, he thought it was simply luck. Perhaps the child had stumbled upon a moment of brilliance in her execution. But as the simulation unfolded and the movements of her ship grew more deliberate, more confident, the Admiral knew this was no accident. This child was doing something far beyond mere chance. She dodged a series of incoming laser blasts with startling accuracy, the ship weaving between the beams like a dancer avoiding the steps of a partner. Yet each time she pulled off the move, there was no hesitation, no moment of doubt. It was as if the child had a deep understanding of the situation, a connection to the simulation that was almost unnerving. The Admiral's mind whirred with questions. How could a human child perform at this level? What kind of training had she undergone to master such advanced tactics? And why was she even here in this high-security facility, allowed access to a program reserved for the most seasoned and elite of military minds? He had seen the best officers of his fleet struggle with maneuvers like these, yet this child was executing them flawlessly with the ease of someone who had lived through them 100 times before. The way she turned the ship, dodging through enemy fire, as though she had an innate sense of where each threat would strike, it was impossible to ignore the growing sense that there was something profoundly unnatural about her ability. As the simulation continued, the child's ship faced off against an oncoming fleet of virtual warships. The enemy ships had appeared suddenly from behind a distant moon, emerging with laser cannons charged and ready to fire. The Admiral had seen the same scenario play out countless times during actual engagements, but the human child seemed to know exactly how to respond without even a second of delay. She didn't panic or hesitate. She didn't even flinch as the enemy ships closed in. Instead, she made a quick calculation and ordered the ship to make a sharp turn to the left, a move that seemed reckless at first. But the Admiral watched with growing interest as the child's ship slipped past the enemy ships. With mere meters to spare, the virtual warships fired their lasers, but the human ship was already gone, maneuvering out of the line of fire with a precision he had only seen in the most experienced commanders. The Admiral's multiple eyes narrowed in disbelief. This was no ordinary player. This wasn't a human child simply pressing buttons in a game. This was a display of military genius, a tactical mastery that was impossible to replicate without years of training, or perhaps even more unnerving, an intuitive knowledge that went beyond training alone. He leaned in closer, his body trembling slightly as the realization set in. What he was witnessing was more than just a simulation. It was a window into something deeper, a raw instinct for battle that had not been seen among humans before, something far beyond what even the most advanced simulations could explain. For a fleeting moment, the Admiral questioned everything he knew about humanity, about the species he had long underestimated. Yet, with each passing second as the child's starship continued to outwit the enemy fleet, the Admiral could only feel the growing sense of awe and fear as the child seemed to glide toward an inevitable victory. The Admiral's mind raced with a mixture of awe and growing concern as the child's starship effortlessly navigated the virtual battlefield. The warships that had once appeared overwhelming now seemed like nothing more than a set of obstacles to be avoided or neutralized. With careful precision, the Admiral's instincts screamed that there was something far deeper at play here, something he couldn't quite grasp, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. He had been watching for what felt like hours now, but time seemed irrelevant in the face of what was unfolding before him. The child was no longer simply playing the game or participating in a simulation. She was commanding the battlefield, as though she had always known how to do it, as if she had been born with the knowledge of every starship tactic and every military strategy in existence. The starship was moving with purpose and intention, a constant, fluid motion that the Admiral recognized immediately as the hallmark of a master tactician. But how could a child possibly possess such advanced skill? How could a human so young have developed an understanding of warfare so far beyond her years? He had witnessed countless battles across the galaxy fought by seasoned commanders and experienced fleets, yet none of them had ever shown the kind of innate brilliance that this small human displayed. In just moments, the child's ship avoided enemy fire with stunning accuracy and retaliated with calculated strikes that were both efficient and ruthless. Every move had a reason, every counter had a purpose. With a sudden jolt, the Admiral's focus snapped back to the simulation. The child's ship was under attack from a group of stealth warships hidden behind a nearby moon, and for a moment the Admiral thought this would be the point where the child would falter. He had seen it before, the moments of panic when a new threat emerged out of nowhere and caught a pilot off guard, but this time there was no hesitation. The child's eyes narrowed in concentration. Her fingers moved over the controls with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. Her ship performed a rapid series of maneuvers that took it deep into the asteroid field, the stealth ships trailing closely behind. Yet never able to land a shot, the Admiral could feel his heart rate quicken with every passing second as the child danced between the rocks, her ship turning and shifting with a speed that felt almost supernatural. Then, without warning, she slammed the engines into full reverse, bringing the ship to a sudden stop and sending it spinning around in a tight arc. The stealth ships had been hot on her trail, but now they were the ones exposed as the child used the asteroid field as cover to flank them from behind with a devastating series of precision missile strikes. The stealth ships tried to retaliate, but the child had already anticipated their moves, her ship weaving through the asteroid field in such a way that every blast of enemy fire missed by mere inches. The child's tactics were brilliant, unpredictable, and terrifyingly effective. The Admiral's chest tightened as he realized that he was witnessing something that defied all logic and reasoning. The child was fighting as though she had been trained by the greatest military minds in the galaxy, but that was impossible, wasn't it? No human could possess such innate tactical genius. Yet the evidence was before him. The child was winning, and not by chance, not by luck, but by something far more unsettling, something that even the Admiral, with all his experience and knowledge, could not comprehend. The simulation was nothing more than a backdrop to the true game being played. The child was not just playing the role of a commander, she was becoming one. And in that moment the Admiral realized the terrifying truth: this human child had the potential to reshape the future of warfare itself. The Admiral's mind raced as the child's starship continued to dominate the virtual battlefield. Every move she made was an intricate piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that was slowly unfolding into a picture of uncanny brilliance. The child was now engaged in a fight that would have tested even the most seasoned fleet commanders, but she seemed unfazed, her fingers working the controls with a confidence that struck fear deep into the Admiral's chest. It wasn't just her skill that unnerved him. It was the clarity with which she read the battlefield, the way she anticipated the enemy's movements, as though she could predict the future. No human child should have such instincts. No human being should possess such raw tactical genius. Yet here she was weaving through a sea of virtual ships and debris, with the grace of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering the art of war. The enemy fleet had begun to regroup and advance toward the child's starship, an organized effort to surround and overwhelm the seemingly lone vessel. Yet the child remained calm. Not a flicker of panic crossed her face, her eyes locked onto the screen as she issued commands with military precision, each order executed without delay. The Admiral's thoughts swirled as he watched the child's ship shift into formation with staggering precision, avoiding a barrage of enemy fire with a sudden roll to the left, before launching a counteroffensive that took the attacking fleet completely by surprise. He had seen these same maneuvers performed by veteran commanders, but never with such finesse, and never with such seeming ease. It was as though the child wasn't just reacting to the simulation. She was controlling it, shaping the course of events with an almost supernatural intuition that no other species could match. Not even the most advanced Xarna fleet officers could perform such a perfect sequence of moves with the same level of consistency. And then it hit him. The Admiral's breath caught in his throat as the realization slammed into his mind like a tidal wave. What if this wasn't just a game? What if the child's actions weren't just part of a program, but were actually tapping into something deeper, something inherent within the human species, something he had never considered before? He watched as the child issued one final command, and in an instant, the virtual fleet was in disarray, the ships scattered and disoriented as the child's ship moved with relentless speed and purpose to take down the largest of the enemy vessels, a massive warship that had been the linchpin of the fleet's formation. With a single strike, the child's ship destroyed the warship, and the remaining fleet faltered. It was an overwhelming victory, but it wasn't the victory that stunned the Admiral. It was the way it had been achieved, the sheer audacity of the tactics, the cold calculation behind every move. The Admiral had never seen such brilliance from any commander, let alone a child. The simulation ended with the child's victory screen flashing triumphantly across the control panel. The Admiral stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. This was no ordinary simulation, no simple game for a child. This was a glimpse into a terrifying future, one where humans had the potential to outthink and outfight even the most advanced species in the galaxy. The child leaned back in her seat, a satisfied grin spreading across her face as she removed her hands from the controls, unaware of the Admiral's stunned gaze. The Xarnov officer's eyes flickered with a growing sense of unease as he slowly realized that what he had just witnessed wasn't just skill or luck, it was something far more profound. It was the beginning of a new chapter in the galaxy's long history of warfare. And it was a chapter that would be written by humans. The Admiral remained motionless, his multiple eyes locked on the child as she leaned back, basking in her triumph, oblivious to the storm of thoughts raging within the alien officer's mind. He had witnessed many moments of genius in his long life, tactical brilliance, unexpected victories, and even rare flashes of innovation. But nothing had prepared him for what he had just seen. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. This human child had not just won a simulation. She had outsmarted an entire fleet. It was as if she had been born with an innate understanding of combat, a tactical mind so sharp that it cut through every obstacle with effortless precision. The Admiral's thoughts churned, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. How could this be? Humans were supposed to be a young species, still fragile, still developing in the grand scheme of the galaxy. And yet here was this child, commanding a virtual fleet with the kind of skill and instinct that even the most experienced generals would envy. His species, the Xarnoth, were renowned for their strategic prowess. They had shaped the fate of galaxies with their minds and their fleets, but they had never encountered anything like this. The humans, it seemed, had a power that was not only unexplored but potentially limitless. He couldn't help but wonder how many others there were. How many humans had this same uncanny ability to understand the art of war on a level that surpassed years of training? Could all of them do this? Was this a trait common among humans, or was this child something special? He had seen humans before, of course, but never one like this. The child stood up from her seat, her eyes wide with excitement as the simulation ended. She was talking to herself, no doubt replaying every move in her head, analyzing the tactics she had used, as though the battle had been as real as any she might one day face. Her enthusiasm was palpable, but what struck the Admiral was the absence of shock or disbelief. She didn't seem surprised by her success. She acted as though it was the most natural thing in the world, as though commanding starships through virtual space was no different than walking. The Admiral's gaze shifted to the empty cockpit around her. The child was alone in the room, isolated from the rest of the crew. And yet, in a sense, she had just proven herself more capable than any of the fleet commanders aboard the flagship. What would the rest of the Xarnoth think if they knew? What would they do with the knowledge that an entire species, fragile and young as it was, had the potential to reshape the future of warfare? His people had once believed themselves to be the dominant force in the galaxy, but now that belief felt hollow. The galaxy was vast, and the humans were proving themselves to be something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. A low hum filled the room as the Admiral's mind spun with possibilities. He had always known that the galaxy was full of unknowns, species and forces yet to be understood, but never had he considered that such an unknown could come from humanity. How could something so seemingly insignificant challenge everything that Xarnoth had worked toward? And yet here it was. He turned his attention back to the child as she began to leave the cockpit, a sense of unease crawling along his spine. Whatever the future held, one thing was certain: this human child was just the beginning. The Admiral stood motionless in the shadows of the observation deck, his mind still spinning from the unsettling revelations he had just witnessed. He had come here to observe, to study the human child's behavior and learn what it might reveal about the species he had once considered insignificant. Instead, he had found himself facing something far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. An unpredictable force of nature, a mind capable of seeing beyond the battlefield and manipulating it with the ease of a seasoned commander. His many eyes flickered as he replayed the moments of the simulation in his mind. Each calculated move the child had made now etched into his thoughts. The way she had anticipated the enemy's actions with uncanny accuracy, how she had maneuvered her starship through dangerous asteroid fields and overwhelming firepower with a fluidity that seemed almost second nature. It was all so disorienting. What had begun as a simple observation had turned into a haunting revelation. The child's brilliance was not something that could be trained. It was instinct, pure and raw, something deep within her that she had tapped into with almost no effort at all. The Admiral's mind was filled with questions that gnawed at him with increasing urgency. Was this unique to her, or were there others like her? Was there an entire generation of humans emerging with this innate ability to understand war and strategy on a level that no other species could match? Could this be the result of some unforeseen evolutionary advantage, a new stage in human development that no one had yet noticed? A chill ran down his spine as he considered the implications. If this child's abilities were indicative of something larger, something widespread within the human race, it could change the course of galactic history. The Xarnoth, with all their military might, could be facing an existential threat, and the humans, small, seemingly insignificant, might be the ones to challenge them. The Admiral's attention snapped back to the child, who was now standing by the door, her excitement still visible in the way she bounced on her heels. She had won the simulation, yes, but it wasn't just about the victory. It was the effortless mastery she had displayed that unsettled him the most. He had never encountered anything like it in his long life. She wasn't just a product of her species' training or some random anomaly. No, this child had been born with something more. The door to the observation deck slid open with a soft hiss, and the child stepped out, unaware of the Admiral's lingering presence. She was heading toward a nearby hallway, her footsteps light and quick, her face still flushed with the excitement of her victory. To anyone who might have seen her, she was just another child, another human with a passion for technology and exploration. But to the Admiral, she was far more than that. She was a symbol of a growing threat, a force that had the potential to unravel everything that Xarnoth had fought to protect. For a moment, the Admiral hesitated. He knew that what he had just witnessed was no fluke. He had seen the potential for greatness in the child's actions, but there was something else, something deeper, a force that he could not yet fully understand. And he knew, without a doubt, that he had to learn more. The future of the galaxy might depend on it. He turned and exited the observation deck, his mind racing with calculations and possibilities. He needed to prepare for what was coming, to gather more intelligence on this new and dangerous phenomenon that humanity had unleashed. Whatever this child was capable of, the Admiral knew one thing for certain. He couldn't afford to underestimate her, or the species she represented. The Admiral spent the next few days in isolation, buried deep within the confines of the flagship's strategic chambers. The observation of the human child had left him restless, unable to focus on anything else. His mind kept returning to that moment, when the child had maneuvered her starship with an elegance and calculation that felt as though she was orchestrating a symphony of war. Each command was as deliberate as the turn of a chess piece, and with each victory, his unease grew. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. This was no ordinary talent, no coincidence. He had seen species across the galaxy engage in complex combat simulations, but nothing like this. This child's instincts were too sharp, her decisions too precise, her actions too confident for someone of her age. It was as though she had been trained in the art of war from birth, as if warfare itself had become part of her very being. As his thoughts swirled, the Admiral began to realize that what he was witnessing was more than just an individual anomaly. There had to be something within humanity itself, a latent power waiting to be tapped, something hidden deep within their evolutionary development. Was this a glimpse into the future of the species? Were all humans destined to unlock this kind of brilliance, this untapped potential for strategic warfare? Or was this child merely the first of many? The possibility terrified him. It wasn't just her skill that unsettled him. It was the way she viewed the simulation. There had been no panic, no fear, no hesitation. Every move she made was calculated. Every risk taken was weighed and measured. When she had been surrounded, she had not flinched or faltered. She had outmaneuvered her enemies with a cold, precise logic that left no room for error. The Admiral had seen seasoned generals freeze in similar situations, paralyzed by indecision. But the child had not hesitated. She had been born with an understanding of warfare that defied explanation. And now, as he prepared to meet with his commanders to discuss the implications of what he had seen, he couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were on the verge of something extraordinary, something that could change the entire balance of power in the galaxy. If this child was any indication, humanity was evolving in a way no one had anticipated. They had always been seen as a fledgling species, weak and disorganized in comparison to the Xarnoth, but now the Admiral wasn't so sure. His meeting with the High Command was brief but intense. The Admiral laid out his findings, recounting every detail of the simulation, describing the child's performance, and suggesting that this was not an isolated incident. The other commanders listened in silence, some skeptical, others troubled by what they heard. But the Admiral had no doubt that his observations were correct. The humans were evolving, and this child was just the beginning. "We must find out more," the Admiral said, his voice low and serious. "If we do not understand what they are capable of, we may be facing a threat unlike any we have ever encountered." The silence in the room was palpable, and for a moment, the Admiral felt the weight of the galaxy bearing down on him. The future was shifting before his eyes, and whether he was ready or not, humanity was about to become a force to be reckoned with. The Admiral stood on the observation deck, gazing out at the stars, his mind still haunted by the child's performance. He had spent hours considering the potential ramifications of what he had witnessed, and yet the answers eluded him. The child's brilliance had shattered his expectations, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that humanity was not just a threat. It was a force that could reshape the very fabric of the galaxy. The High Command had agreed with him. The Xarnoth could no longer afford to view humans as insignificant or unworthy of attention. Their potential was too great, and if they were left unchecked, the balance of power would tip irrevocably. The Admiral had ordered an immediate expansion of intelligence efforts. Every known human faction, every major military leader, every potential threat, they would all be monitored, analyzed, and studied. But even as he gave the orders, the Admiral knew that it might already be too late. The humans were no longer just a small, fragmented species on the fringes of galactic affairs. They were evolving, and with every passing day, they were becoming something more than anyone could have predicted. As the Admiral mulled over the future, he couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were already ahead of him, playing a game he had not yet learned to understand. In the days that followed, he found himself haunted by the memory of the child's eyes, her calm determination as she navigated the battlefield with a level of ease that should have been impossible. She had seen the battlefield not as a collection of obstacles, but as a canvas, painting every move with the brushstrokes of a master strategist. And he had watched as she commanded the stars, her hands seemingly pulling at the threads of the universe itself. The Xarnoth had long prided themselves on their intelligence and strategic superiority, but in the face of this new human potential, those attributes now seemed hollow. The galaxy was vast, and the humans were poised to make their mark on it in ways no one could predict. The Admiral was no longer sure if the Xarnoth would even be able to keep up. As the weeks turned to months, humanity's rise became undeniable. The Admiral saw news reports of human fleets engaging in combat with impressive coordination and strategy, battles that once would have been beyond their capabilities. It wasn't just the military prowess that stood out. It was the way humans approached conflict, their ability to adapt, to think outside the box, to improvise when the situation called for it. It was as if they could sense the ebb and flow of the battle itself, predicting the next move before it even happened. But the Admiral couldn't help but wonder, was this a result of the child's uncanny brilliance alone, or was it something deeper within humanity that was awakening? Were all humans capable of this kind of tactical genius, or was the child an anomaly, an outlier, a single flash of brilliance in an otherwise unremarkable species? The truth, as it turned out, was both more unsettling and more fascinating than he could have ever imagined. The Admiral's intelligence network reported that more and more human children were beginning to show signs of the same remarkable aptitude for strategy and warfare. The future he had feared was now a reality, and there was no turning back. As he stood there, staring out into the infinite expanse of stars, the Admiral knew that the galaxy was on the verge of a new era. Whether the Karnoth would survive it or not was still uncertain, but one thing was certain: the humans would play a pivotal role in shaping that future. The age of underestimating humanity was over, and the Admiral had no choice but to face the reality that the game had changed forever. And in that moment, he understood. It was no longer a question of whether humanity would rise. It was a question of how they would change the galaxy, and whether anyone could stop them.